Hello, everyone. Welcome to another iMagazine video focused on investor relations careers. Once again, I'm joined by Smooch Repovich Rosenberg, Executive Recruitment Specialist. Smooch, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tim. I'm really excited to be chatting with you and fielding these questions from your followers. So it's an exciting moment.
Fantastic. Well, as you were just mentioning there, Smooch, we're going to try something a bit different with this video today. Smooch, you've told me in the past that you love it at conferences where, at the end of a session or at the end of the day, you pull up a stall and just take questions from the audience. And they could be on anything, and you're just happy to field any questions that the audience has. So the idea is for us to sort of recreate that here in our video, and I'll be putting some questions to you. Those questions have been gathered from a variety of different sources, from our events, from things that people have emailed into us. But Smooch, just to confirm, you don't know any of these questions that are about to come up, do you?
No, I don't. They're all live and new to me.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into it. And the first question is the Great Resignation still in force in investor relations? And so by that, we're referring to the fact that over the last couple of years, many people have changed jobs in all different industries, but including investor relations. So are we still in that kind of jobs market at the moment in the IR world?
I would say it's slowed a bit, Tim, but the last 2.5 years have been by far the most aggressive hiring markets that we've seen in 2 decades. I think that companies have had to, just by the sheer impact of the pandemic, having never lived through one, the management teams have had to make some very strong and harsh decisions, and that's prompted a lot of change.
Okay, so a lot of change, but maybe just cooling off a little bit in the IR world. I think as we're seeing more generally in the market as well. And the next question is one that was put to me directly, actually, by an IRO I was talking to in relation to an article I was doing. And they mentioned they've been offered roles by recruiters, but they were in a later stage of their career. And so they weren't sure if it made sense to take up any new offers. They weren't planning to change jobs, but now they were starting to field offers which they weren't expecting. So what advice would you have to somebody in that situation?
Always have a listening ear. You can always say no, but if the pipeline of communication is open, either from the recruitment community or directly from companies, I think it behooves people to listen. Because even though you may not be contemplating a change, part of our role as recruiters is to bring you your next best career step. And so that may come in an unsolicited conversation. And it also keeps you abreast of what's happening in the marketplace. And I think that's something we all should be doing all the time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Smooch. And I'm going to change it up a bit for the next question. This is about people coming into the IR role from either the sell side or from a buy side position. And so we often get questions about this at our events. And so for somebody coming in from either an investment bank or maybe an investment firm, how can they best adapt the strengths and the experience they already have to the investor relations role that they're coming into?
Well, the first comment I would make to you, Tim, is they need to get their ego in check. I mean, let's face it, the investment community operating cultures don't always require that someone develops one of the key intangible leadership attributes called gravitas. And I think that's something that gets kind of lost in that transition from the investment community to the corporate world. And so I think that both buy and sell siders should step back and think about what are those both intangible leadership attributes that they have developed, where their gaps are in those areas, and then what tangible experiences they have that can help them build that bridge to the other side to be a corporate IR practitioner. When I get phone calls from buy and sell siders, typically I say to them, your best bet is to go into a large IR department where you can learn the IR profession from the inside out before you try to become the head of IR. And yes, they bring a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, but they don't get some of the training that on the corporate side professionals do get and management teams want.
Fantastic. Thank you, Smooch. I think that's great advice, especially given just how many people come into the profession from those areas. And then maybe
And
for my
let
next
me
question,
add one
oh, sorry, go on to me.
other thing, Tim, that I think is important. As you can imagine, I get a lot of unsolicited calls from the investment community. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is their first communication to me is, I know everything an IRO knows. And the reality of it is they don't. And I think that's an example of a little bit of that arrogance of, well, I've been on the receiving side of what an IRO produces, and whether it's tangible documents, it's conversations. Therefore, I know I see what's good and what I like as an analyst, and therefore I know how to be better than that. And, easily within 30 seconds, I've dispelled that individual of their belief that they're the next greatest IRO because they have not done very important things such as, taking aside a CEO and saying, hey, what you said on that last earnings call, 80% of it was great, but the other 20% undermined the 80% by half. And so you've got a gap there. You've got a hole you got to fill. You got to pivot this conversation. And let's talk about how. If you can't be that consultative advisory IRO, it's not going to help you to get into a role that's in the top job because you will not be able to at least meet expectations on the part of your two key partners, CEO and CFO.
Sure, it's probably like a bit like a journalist applying for a a PR or communications role, right? They think they know it all already, but there's an awful lot to learn from the other side. And speaking of sort of making mistakes, this brings me nicely onto my next question that I wanted to ask. Really interested in hearing your thoughts on this. What are some common mistakes that IR professionals make in job interviews?
Oh my gosh. How many hours do you have, Tim?
We could do a segment on this
I
just on this question, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I could write a whole book on this. I think
Your
the
top
biggest
two or your top three.
Well, let's talk about the biggest mistake. I don't think that people stop and think about how to frame their brand.
Hmm.
And to every executive that I deal with who I put into one of my searches, I talk them through this because I think it is, listen, nobody at university gets the playbook on how to navigate your career, how to interview, how to do a lot of these things. And I live in that universe. And I think people who have terrific careers, whether you're 10 years, 15 years, or 25 years into your career, you have to stop and think ahead of time. What are the best attributes as an executive that you bring to the table? The top two or three. What are the most important four or five tangible pieces of experience that you bring to that particular company, given their situation? And study hard. You can't just gloss through an interview. What management teams want today is somebody who is going to ask really savvy questions that will demonstrate that they know almost as much as the executives inside that company, which means you got to work for it. You can't just glibly go about saying, well, I'm the IR functional specialist, so that's all that should matter. No, they want you to know about their industry. If you're crossing industries, they want you to know what their last couple of earnings cycles were all about, how they performed on their earnings calls. You really have to study for that. So rather than the top two, I mean, I think that's the biggest, meatiest one piece of advice that I can offer.
Mm. No, that's very, very helpful to understand. Thank you, Smooch. And as you say, there's probably a lot of other sub mistakes or little smaller mistakes that people are making all the time. But we can get into some more of those during another chat. But I just had one final question, and this is a question that came up
Yes.
a couple of times at some events we've been doing recently, which was just sort of looking forwards. What do you think are the top challenges for IR professionals as we come out of the pandemic right now?
Top challenges. I think there's a couple of them, Tim. One, I go back to an adage that I've said for 30 years, candidate, know thyself. I think one of the challenges coming out of this pandemic is a lot of IR professionals will have either taken a role that ultimately they don't like, or they will have been convinced and shoved into a role that they're not suited for. And I know that, this frenzy we've been living with for the last couple of years, I don't think it's a benefit to anybody, corporations or IR talent, for a whole host of reasons. And I think we're going to see the fallout of that in about 12 to 18 months, where people are going to be leaving jobs because they're not happy. They're going to be rethinking their careers. And so I think people should prepare themselves now about get the crystal ball out. What are you looking and staring into for the next 18 months? Because I don't think the world is going to settle down in terms of the economy, values, expectations for probably another year or 18 months. I mean, we've all been put in kind of this um, air popper, where we've all been tumbled in different directions that we never thought about. So I think spending the time just thinking about who you are, what your value system is, what you want out of either the next step or the balance of your career, I think that's what people need to be thinking about, because now that management has raised the bar of expectations, people need to decide they're either going to uh, meet it or exceed it, or maybe they change courses. But I don't think we've hit easy street yet in terms of career navigation being balanced.
Thank you, Smooch. No, I think that that's great advice. And as you say, we've all been through so much change over the last couple of years. Taking a moment, like you say, to sort of center yourself, work out if you're in the right place and what you want to do next is really important. Um, but that's all the time we have for our Q&A session today. Smooch, you did a fantastic job answering all those questions cold without any preparation. How did you find it?
Very easy. I have so much knowledge in my mind. I mean, live Q&As when I'm doing presentations and such is really very gratifying for me, Tim, because people have a lot of questions on their minds that you can't get answered in, even if you saw 15 presentations. And I think for people to be able to ask those questions that are tangible and on their minds and get a real, genuine answer, that's fun for me because I like to help people with their careers. So thanks for having me do this.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining. And speaking of those questions that people may have, we're planning to do more of these videos. So if you do have a question or a dilemma that you'd like Smooch to answer, then do send it in to us and we'll include it in a future Q&A session. But for now, Smooch, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all so much for watching.